Welcome to the Jesus Took Naps podcast, where we learn to embrace the remarkably ordinary life of Jesus on our daily journey. Join us as we talk about life and faith, navigate our own relationships with God, and grow in friendship with each other. We will engage questions about the church and the cultural context of our day as we challenge assumptions and grow in our faith together.
Hello, everybody. This is Victor Scott with Jesus Took Naps, and my friend, say your name.
Drew Anderson.
Drew Anderson. We're taking turns starting off these podcasts and realizing what our strengths and weaknesses are, and it's just a good time. We always decide just to hit record because otherwise we're going to waste all the good information talking to ourselves privately rather than talking to each other on these things.
Yeah, then including other people in on it.
Yeah, so we're continuing our journey with you, and we're just so excited to have you here with us, and we're looking forward to continuing to grow together as we figure out what it looks like to live a normal Christian life with the Lord and with each other as we grow and are challenged and all kinds of things that are happening. And one of the things that we want to do is we just want to model a little bit of what life lived together looks like. And so these conversations are really just about that. They're not, we're not trying to be fancy with any of this. We're not trying to impress anybody. Even if you were listening for the first couple of episodes, you'll see that we're still learning a lot about each other just in this whole thing.
Yeah.
And so we're excited to share that with you and just to be as transparent and open with each other and with you as we can. And so thank you for joining us and being a part of this conversation with us. And today we're just going to continue this journey, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we met, because a lot of what's happening in this podcast is a result of just conversations that Drew and I have been having for going on several years now.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it had to do with just our growth together and our friendship and how we were trying to figure out who we were and what that was all about, and learning to talk to each other. And I think we take that for granted, just, differences in communication styles and the way that God has been leading us and showing us who he is in our own lives. And so, I'm going to toss it over to Drew because I'm going to let him kind of ask the questions and get us going. But I just want to let y'all know that this is kind of what we're going to do, is just talk and just share from our life's experiences and the things that God has been showing to us in and through the relationship and the friendship that we've built. And I think that's something that we need to do more of in the church, and just as we journey together as members of Christ's body. And so we're going to talk a little bit of just our journey together in this idea of friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the whole reason for the podcast, is just inviting others into this journey that we've been on, these conversations we've been having. That's a lot of why we're podcasting, period. And the fact that we've named the podcast what we have with Jesus Took Naps, and are trying to focus on this idea that this remarkably ordinary life that this Messiah lived, that changed the entire world. It's just an ongoing journey with him and relationship with him, and then navigating our relationship together in the midst of that is a huge part of what we're inviting other people into, is our own navigating of our relationship. Because like you said, I think a lot of the times we fall short in the church of doing a really good job of navigating how you form relationship with other people, and how you show grace in the midst of it, and how you challenge one another, and how you sharpen one another, like the scriptures talk about. And so I think that certainly has been definitive, has defined our relationship. There's been a sharpening throughout the relationship that we've had, the friendship we've had, and as we've gotten to know each other.
Yeah, I think we just take that for granted sometimes.
Yeah,
and we just think that it'll just, we like to use the word organic. It'll just happen organically.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how true that is.
Yeah, no.
Even with people who I would say, I would say I'm a pretty mature person. I think you're a pretty mature person.
Yeah.
And even us who would say, hey, we're kind of mature. We're like, man, we're not doing this right. Like, we can feel that tension, and we're like, what are we saying to each other? How are we not clicking on these conversations that we're having?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think actually what would be funny is if people really knew how many times there was like talking past each other that occurred in our friendship, and where aren't intentionally talking past each other. It's just what's happening. And then there's like, that creates a tension, whether good or bad. There's tension there when that happens. And like I was telling you that other day, there was just another relationship in my life where I was doing the same thing, having the same sort of back and forth conversation with the person. And for whatever reason, there was offense being taken by the things that I was saying or the questions I was asking. And I didn't realize it. Right. And then it wasn't being communicated that that's what was happening. And it hurt the ongoing friendship and the conversation. It broke down, like the relationship broke down because of that back and forth. And I didn't realize that there was miscommunication happening. Well, what we've managed to do in the time that we've known each other is that when there is miscommunication that occurs, we come back to the conversation. Like we come back to the table. Right. We don't just like give up on it just because we miscommunicated. Where it'd be easy to take offense or, give up or be like, we're just not clicking. We haven't done that. We've kind of come back to the relationship. Like, okay, well, we're going to keep leaning in here. And I think that healthy perseverance through those miscommunications or just through those tensions of like, oh, we got to navigate what we're trying to say here, have really produced a healthy relationship, a healthy friendship. At the end of the day, it's produced a context where we can talk about a lot of different things. Pretty much everything's on the table. And
because it's not about trying to one up one another.
No, there's no sense.
We're really trying to learn, right?
Yeah,
because we're bringing the things that are concerning us. I think for me, and I'll just say this, that one of the most important things you can say when you're having a conversation with somebody is, "I don't understand. Can you clarify that?"
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've just posted that in our text thread. I was like, explain that.
Yeah.
And that just a shorthand because it's text. And I said, just explain that to me. Tell me more. What does that mean? Those kinds of clues tell the other person, oh, I wasn't as clear as I thought I was. It made sense in my brain and it made sense when I was texting it, but the other person on the other end did not receive the message.
Yeah.
And even if I think I know where you're going with it, I still might want clarification because I want to make sure that I'm following you with the line of thought that you're having.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be more comfortable with that just in general. And I've definitely gotten more comfortable with that with you and with other people, not just with you, but since we're talking about our friendship, because I know that we're coming from different points of reference, the way that we've experienced our life in the church and our life with God.
That's right.
And so I know that I've said things and you're just like, that's insane. And I was like, probably, but that's just what makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And so I've got to find ways of communicating that to you.
Yeah. And some of it's just personality type. I've realized over the last however many years of my life that like I tend to like I'm in the middle of a string of thoughts and then I tend to invite someone into the middle of those string of thoughts. Like I've already thought through half of what I'm trying to say, but instead of starting at the beginning with someone, I'll make a statement or a comment or ask a question and it's like in the middle somewhere. And I have to then catch them up to like, oh, well, this is why I'm saying that, or this is where the question's coming from. And so then they're like, oh, okay, now I understand. But I just personality wise, like it just happens. Like my mind's running and then I'm like, shoot a text message and they're like, I don't get it. I don't
yeah, midstream. I'm like, and I've asked you, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I was like, are we changing subjects here? I don't know what's going on.
And it's just my brain works that way, right? And so it's personality type completely. But yeah, certainly vantage points too, and experiences and how we've been raised and cultural values. I mean, all kinds of stuff are all brought into our friendship and our relationship. But I'll say this: we met. All right, so we met because we could have crossed paths in multiple different occasions in our life. Like that. There's some irony to that we've discovered through our story over time. But the reason we crossed paths is I took a job at a church as an associate pastor right after, 3 months after, I think you had left the church. Right. You were the youth pastor and basically functioning as an associate at the end there. But your title was youth pastor. And then you left in like April or May and went to go serve under your dad, where you currently are, serve
No, I
with
left
your
at the
dad.
end of the year. So just
Oh,
to clarify timeline. Yeah, I had left in December
oh, in
of that
December.
year.
Oh, okay. See, I misunderstood that. Oh, okay. So it was
Yeah,
longer, about 6 months then. Sorry.
yeah,
So about 6 months. See, we're learning things already. I don't know where I got that timeline from, but anyways, you left at the end of that year,
yeah,
and then I would have come in
correct.
that June or July. I can't remember now, but I think it was July 1st was my start date. So anyway, so I came into this church situation, and the way I, I guess the way I did ministry and the way I carried myself, everyone kept referencing that I reminded them of Victor. Like, oh, well,
That's funny.
you're like Victor. You remind me of Victor. And I'm like, well, who is this Victor guy? Like, who is he? And so, I
Right.
got bits and pieces from people about who you were, but I never got to know who you were from the bits and pieces they shared. So at some point I knew like, I'm going to have to get to know this Victor guy if they say I'm like him. And so, then where our friendship actually began is we served on a retreat together. We served
Hmm.
on the spiritual team or the leadership team of this retreat. For those that know about Chrysalis Emmaus, it was a Chrysalis weekend, but spiritual retreat for teenagers. We were on the leadership team, and it was because of a mutual friend who both asked us to be on the leadership team, that then we actually formed a friendship that weekend. That was the beginning of kind of our
Yeah,
friendship. And we still didn't really know much about each other, but we started communicating a little bit at that point. And then,
yeah,
if my timeline's correct, it was about 4 years ago now, which is wild. But about 4 years ago, our relationship started to ramp up because we entered into this church planning journey, and I had asked you and your dad and y'all's church if y'all would be a supporting church for us.
yeah,
And in that process, knew I also wanted to form a friendship and relationship with y'all. I felt the connection there of like, well, there's things I can learn from them in this journey, and so I want to have
yeah.
this relationship with them and get to know them more. And I think that's where the frequency of our friendship picked up. Um, yeah,
Yeah, because so for us, one of the values of that our church has is whenever we partner with someone, we're like all in. So that's just kind of just
yeah,
part of the
yeah,
mindset that we have. And so we'd had these ongoing conversations, and they revolved around discipleship and Bible study and just spiritual growth, and some of the challenges that we'd seen in the church. And so we would like shoot off a text here every once in a while, and then we would catch up at some of these Chrysalis events that we did somewhat regularly enough to meet up. But it probably, you're right. I think it really started to ramp up when we started into this partnership and helping you plant the church there in Sumter Chapel, and um, and probably the start of the pandemic, right when things started to really kind of go crazy about what the church was going to do and how we were going to figure out some stuff. We really started to have these conversations about what
yes,
in the world does this thing called the church looks like,
yeah,
and that's really when there was this moment where our conversations pivoted to
yes,
what does it look like to be a Christian in times like these, right? So
yeah,
we're just trying to figure out what church life looks like.
yeah,
What are we going to do? We're so used to meeting in buildings, and now all of a sudden we're distributed diaspora church where people are not sure what to do. How do we minister? So all of these questions started to really happen,
yeah.
and both you and I think, were trying to just figure out what that looked like for us individually, not
That's right.
necessarily as pastors or
That's right.
church leaders.
That's right.
We're like, okay, what do I, as an individual Christian, how do I deal with this? Because I don't know that there was any person who was left unaffected. Like, everybody was touched
Yeah, in some
about
way.
this, in trying to figure out what does it mean to be the church when we can't gather together,
That's
right?
right.
Because that was the mindset of at least church in America, right?
That's right.
There's a building, we go to the building, we do the stuff in the building. What happens then? And now there's no meeting in the building. There's no going there. There's no, right. And so, and the conversations that sparked because of that, people who were for it, against it, who were angry about it,
That's
who
right.
were happy about it,
That's right.
whatever. So it's all over, and we're not going to rehash all that now.
No,
But
no, no. And then I think it only heightened, like our conversations only got more and more frequent, and then more and more honing and clarifying our thought processes on things. When the racial tensions rose, when politics,
hmm
was first on everyone's list again, when all these things were happening in our world, this kind of chaotic couple of years, really about a chaotic year and a half, we were constantly in communication at that point, because I think it was this constant, for me, it was this constant like wanting to check in with certain people in my life who I knew um, like had a steady hand. Is the best way I know how to talk about it. You know, when someone's got a steady hand, they're gonna walk through things at a in a patient way, with
Hmm.
a confidence that someone who's still trying to figure it out isn't. Someone still trying to figure it out may be able to have some faux confidence, like it's going to work out, but they really don't have a confidence. And I had a couple people in my life really that I was like, okay, uh, I can trust that when I come to this person with my own like questions or things, that they're going to handle it with that sort of a steady hand, and they're not going to be caught off guard by it. So that's part of it, because some people get really caught off guard when you start asking difficult questions, or when you start saying things that could sound heretical at first, right? But you're just trying to
Hmm.
push the envelope. You're just trying to push a little bit to be like, okay, am I crazy here, or where's the landing point of this? Um, and you were one of those people in my life that I knew
It's
I could
really
do
weird
that
to
with.
hear you describe me this way.
Yeah, you were.
Because I don't see myself that. I'm not saying I'm off the handle.
No,
I'm just
no, yeah,
saying
yeah,
that description is really odd to me, just because of the way that I was trained in just life and ministry. I was like, so a principle that my dad taught me was nothing's happened until something happens. And so I've tried my best over the course of my life to apply that to almost everything. So it's funny to hear you describe it, in that terminology
yeah,
of the steady hand, but it's just me just taking things as they come, right? That's just my natural kind of disposition now, as best as it can be. I'm not saying I'm stoic and all of a sudden nothing bothers me. That's not what that means. It's just I don't want to jump the gun on things. I
yeah,
don't want to get too quick with all these silly metaphors. Get over my skis, right?
yeah,
All the
yeah,
stuff that
yeah,
people say. Um, but I don't know. Well, dude, that's very humbling, because I don't think I've ever heard you describe that whole thing.
yeah,
But anyways,
yeah,
cool. I don't know what
yeah.
to say.
Yeah.
We'll move on. I
You
just,
don't want to
I
talk about
just,
yourself. Yeah,
I'm there. Yeah,
it's,
that makes me very uncomfortable.
but that's what it was. It really was that. Um, but I also knew you had a very sharp mind. You know, I tend to think I have a pretty sharp mind, but I like to have others in my life who also do, because I, while I feel like I have a handle on things, sometimes I
Hmm.
know I don't see the full picture. I'm smart enough to recognize that even in the sharpest of minds, you don't see the whole picture. You still only
Yeah.
see part of it. And so
Yeah, we need more of that. Phew.
I knew, like, okay, let's just go with the race thing, right? I knew how I was reacting to some of the race stuff happening, even though
Hmm.
I knew I had a decently broad understanding of what was going on. I'd been in the racial reconciliation, social justice, racial righteousness. I don't know. The words keep changing, but I'd been in that world for like 5 years when the pandemic
Yeah.
hit. So I was pretty well versed. Like when people were just reading books on racial reconciliation, I'd been living in that world for a little while. But even living in that world for 5 years, um, is still not that long, and it's a world, as we can get into this race conversation, can get real deep fast, but as a white male in America, like I can choose not to be in that world if I want to not be, because I'm majority culture, and that's true of any culture. If you're majority culture,
Right.
you can choose to just stay in the majority culture all the time. Well, even though I had been intentionally inserting myself into the non-majority culture spaces, it doesn't mean that I understood them completely enough. And you can overgeneralize. What I learned pretty quickly is you can overgeneralize those spaces just as much as you can
Yeah.
overgeneralize any space. So you can monolith those spaces as if every person of color is going to react to a certain event the same way. Well, that's not true.
Correct.
And so
Yeah.
I just knew, okay, hey, this thing just happened in our culture. I feel like I have an understanding of how to respond to it, but Victor has a really sharp mind, and he's in ministry in a multi-ethnic congregation. Like he's around people all the time who are reacting to these events. I I would like to share these thoughts with him first before I go fly off at the handle and post something. So that was a constant on any topic that came up. I just realized, like, okay, even if I'm going to disagree with Victor at the end of the day, I know
Hmm.
he's going to provide me thoughtful responses. He's going to challenge my assumptions, and he's going to help me clarify what I'm trying to actually say. And so you were someone I knew I could go to with something before I would just put it out there for the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember a lot of these
Anyways.
conversations. Just for the sake of those who might be here with us. You know, I come from my parents come from Puerto Rico, so I come from a Latino Hispanic
Yeah.
background. Um, Grew up kind of a child of two cultures,
Yeah.
having been born in the States, but raised by people who were, first generation travelers, immigrants, sojourners into the American culture, being bilingual, Spanish,
Mhm.
English, and spending a good portion of my ministry experience growing up in African American Hispanic churches, and then now pastoring a predominantly African American minority church, Hispanic, all kinds of things. So that's the world in which I live. And so when these events are happening all around us, I'm like, okay, how do I respond to this? Right? How do I just me personally respond to this? And then Drew brings these questions to me, and I was like, this is what I feel, and all this kind of stuff. And I remember one of the common threads I kept saying, I said, you are reacting, your emotional reaction to the event is right. The problem that I was seeing and that I was trying to help Drew see was, but the way you're trying to quote unquote fix the problem is not
Mm.
right. Like that is the part where you're getting into trouble, right? Because the response was correct, but the corrective action that should have been taken to get us back on track was not, typically, right? And it wasn't a bad motivation.
No.
It wasn't
Yeah.
that he didn't have good ideas. It was just that it was such an emotional topic that it was difficult. And because I grew up in a minority experience, just in general, I knew that that was going to get you into trouble. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, let's slow down,
Yeah. Yeah.
because if you say that to someone whose experience is that, they're not going to hear you,
Mm.
right? They're not going to hear your heart. They're not going to hear your desire. They're not going to hear what you're trying to provide and insert yourself doing. And so I remember a lot of the conversations were not, no, Drew, you got that wrong. It was, Drew, you got that right. But if you say that way, right? So it became a lot about the
Yeah. Yeah.
language across cultural understandings and ethnic, experiences.
Yeah.
You had to navigate that more carefully.
That's right.
All of us, not just you, but
Yeah. All of
the
us.
general you there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was some, and even me, right? Even though I was having to minister and be a pastor in that context, I was learning so much about how I needed to respond.
Mhm.
It wasn't just that Drew was like, Victor can help me with this. I was like, no, all of your questions and all of the ways you came, I said, I need to think about that more deeply. I need to be more intentional in understanding that perspective and trying to make sure that I was not overreacting or underreacting, even, because that was
Mhm.
also a temptation that I run into, is to just kind of throw my hands up and say, no, pause, I'm not going to do anything.
Mhm.
But I've always been someone, like I said, um, nothing's happened until something happens,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I call that my dad's best advice ever,
It is good.
because
It's
it,
good
it
stuff.
it called me to just pause and say, yes, you want to respond, but be clear, be clear, be clear. And as a Christian and as a pastor, be biblical, be Christ-like, right? Be God honoring.
Yeah.
And so all of those things were running through my mind. And so something would happen, and it would literally take me 4 to 5 days before I could get over the emotional response that I was having to something, before I was clear enough to write something down
Mhm.
or to say something.
Mhm.
And even in that process, I was texting Drew, and I was talking to my dad, and I was talking to some of our church leaders, and I was like, what are y'all thinking? How are
Mhm.
y'all feeling? Right?
Mhm.
Bouncing off my own ideas. And so that was a challenge. That
Yeah.
was a challenge, that there are not enough spaces in the church where we um, slow down enough,
Yeah.
where we can be honest about that, because that over the course of
There's
the
this
last four
wonderful phrase.
years,
I'm going to insert it real quick. There's this wonderful phrase, and I can't remember who it's by. Maybe Eugene Peterson, but it's maybe C.S. Lewis. I don't. One of the great thinkers, where it's like we have to learn how to slow down in order to catch up with God.
yes, that's so good.
Anyways,
I don't know who it is.
I don't know who it
That's
is.
so good.
We'll find it. We'll stick it in the notes. But go ahead.
No, I'm just saying but the thing is that I think technology and
Yeah.
the way that culture is moving
Yeah.
around us, as the church, we're constantly looking back at what we have been given, right? The deposit of faith. That's historically how it's been called in the church, that we have been entrusted with deposit of faith,
Mhm.
that we don't know how to live that out in a society that's moving at the speed of light,
Yeah.
literally at the
Yeah.
speed of light.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things, is how do we keep our bearing, right? How do we
Mhm.
keep going in the direction that God is calling us while not losing ourselves in the process
Yeah.
with what's going on in the culture? And so that
Yeah.
was one of the challenges, that in our, even in our relationship and in our, because one of the, just to kind of make sure everybody's on track, we're talking about just our own communication issues,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so you're coming to me with these
That's
questions, and I'm
right.
like, okay, how do I respond to this without insulting him? Right? How do I tell him that if he were to say that to anybody else, he'd probably get popped in the mouth? Like,
But that's what I wanted. But that's what I wanted. The
yeah,
irony is, like, you were offering me what I was looking for. And I think it's funny because at one point we talked about like how I perceived you early on. And I
hmm,
don't know if you knew, like early on you would frustrate me a lot. Like you would really frustrate me a lot. But I kept coming back because I wanted you to frustrate me. Like that's the irony is, like, it's not that you frustrated me to the point where I was like, I can't be friends with this person. No, you frustrated me to a good point. Like you were pushing
hmm,
me. It was a good frustration. It was like, man, I don't like that he is forcing me to have to actually say things as clearly as they should be said, or that he's forcing me to actually have to think outside of the
right,
soundbite that I had already craft craftably that's not a word, that I already crafted. Like this
yeah,
soundbite that I had crafted was perfectly crafted and would be great, and it would get the rise that I want out of someone, and then you would bring in your correct biblical logic, and it would slow me down, and I go, oh man, okay. And it was frustrating to the degree that it was challenging, the speed at which I was trying to respond to things. One,
hmm,
I was caught up in that. And so it was challenging that, but it was also just challenging assumptions that I had.
mm,
It was challenging assumptions that I had. Um, and, and so there was some frustration there, but it was like a really good frustration. And I knew I needed that in my life. So it was very much like I don't like a tether. Like, I don't know if you've ever,
yeah,
yeah, like if you've ever climbed or repelled or done anything like that, you always are tethered in. You're always like roped in, so that if something happens, it can catch you. Like you're not going to actually get hurt and fall. It was a lot like. Like I knew I was tethering myself, of course, to Jesus and the Scriptures and the Holy Spirit, of course. But this is why relationship is so important, because I was tethering myself to Jesus and the Scriptures and the Holy Spirit. I don't I don't know if I want to say through you, but with you. But with you. Like I was tethered to him with you. Like you were a part of the tether. Like I don't get Jesus and the Scriptures and the Holy Spirit in the same way without you being a part of that equation. Like you were putting flesh on. This is the, like, maybe
yeah.
theological way to say this. You were putting flesh on in those moments, Jesus and the Scriptures and the Holy Spirit's voice into my life. Like you were putting flesh on in that sense to him in those moments. Like you were being Christ-like. You were saying, hey, calm down. Like, hey, slow down.
Well, I think that as I'm listening to you describe this, one of the things that I think we get wrong in the church, right, is everyone wants to say God's speaking to me through the Scripture, or
That's
God
right.
is
Yeah,
speaking to
yeah.
me as I'm walking around in the nature or whatever. Everyone has these super spiritualized kind of ideas of how God is speaking to
And he
them.
does do that sometimes. Like, don't.
No, no, right. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
discounting
yeah,
that at
yeah,
all,
yeah, yeah.
right? But then we have these people in our lives, and
That's
I
right.
have them too. You're one of them in my life, that that they are filled with the Holy Spirit. They are walking with God. They have learned a bunch of stuff about God, and then when they speak to us, we get angry. I'm like, well, hold up, wait a minute. The reason you're not angry at God is because you probably have just made up whatever you wanted Him to say to agree with you, and you misrepresented that Scripture, so it says whatever you wanted to say. But when this person that who you know is also filled with God, is speaking to you and they're frustrating you. I remember the first time you told me that, I just busted out laughing.
Yeah.
I was like, because I know I can be irritating, and I'm gonna be honest about that. But I think I'm irritating to people because I have made it my mission, and I have said this on many occasions. I have made it my mission to be as consistent as I can with what I believe.
Hmm.
I want to be as consistent as I can. To my own hurt, I want to be as consistent as I can be.
Yeah.
And I know that drives people nuts.
Yeah.
It drives people nuts because it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Right. And so I remember the first time you said that, I was like, well, I guess I'm doing it right then. Right. I just said that in my own head. But I didn't realize, the thing is, I think until you told me that, I don't think I'd realize how much, how difficult that was,
Mm.
both to do and how that affected people around me.
Mm.
I think you were one of the first people, other than my wife, who had really helped me to make sense of that. You were the first, probably one of the first people outside of my family
Mm.
who helped me to see that effect that I had on people.
Mhm.
Which is sad because I don't want people to get frustrated with, how I do things. I want to be as helpful as I can, kind of just pointing back to, this passion that I have to help people to understand God's word,
Yeah.
something that's really inside of me. And if people are frustrated with me, then I can't offer that to them. I can't give that to them because they're like, well, Victor's this or that or the other.
Yeah,
But
I don't
at
know.
the
I
same,
don't know. I disagree. I've really been thinking through this around this, this passage that we love to quote. One of my pet hobbies is to take scriptures that people love to quote and then like blow them
yeah,
up on people because they typically take them out of context. But this scripture where it talks about iron sharpening iron, right?
right.
And we love to, people love to quote that scripture, especially pastors. Iron sharpen iron. We don't think through the fact that like that's a pretty brutal process. Like,
Hmm.
like if you've ever watched iron sharpen iron, like that's a painful process for the iron. If the iron had feelings, like
Hmm.
that is not like fun. So the irony is like when we quote that passage, we have to be ready for sparks to fly.
Hmm.
That's what happens. Like
Yeah, friction creates heat.
friction creates heat. So like
Yep.
you can't be, another good analogy around metal is forging. Like you can't be forged
Hmm.
without heat. It literally doesn't happen. Like the only way to forge metal is to get it really hot and hit it with more metal. So like I hate to, burst people's bubbles if they want to like over like beautify or
Right.
I don't know, over
They spiritualize it. That's
spiritualize.
basically what.
Yeah. Over
Yeah.
spiritualize that the good of a really solid relationship with someone else who knows Jesus is like there's going to be frustrating moments, there's going to be friction moments, there's going to be sparks that fly. Those are all going to be things that produce the sharpening that you need. And
Yeah.
like we go in with wrong expectations, I think that like, oh man, this is just going to be smooth sailing. No, I don't want it to be smooth sailing. Like I want there to be tension and friction and I want us to figure it out together because that's what will produce what I'm looking for.
But that can only happen in a high trust situation.
Oh, 1,000%. Yes.
And so I just want to throw that out there because
Yes.
there
Yeah.
has to be, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that on 2 points. It has to be high trust in the sense that you genuinely believe, as the person who's
That's right.
bringing question or inquiry or searching to another person, you have to believe that other person is going to not receive offense when you
That's
say
right.
that, right? That they're genuine in their desire, their good faith. We throw that word a lot. But just to mess with people about the iron sharpens iron. One of my favorite ways of disrupting people's mindset on that is asking the question, why do you assume that the other person is iron?
Oh, yeah.
What if you are the one receiving benefit from them, but you're a softer material like wood, right? So when someone says, yeah, it's just like iron sharpens iron, they are the ones receiving benefit. Don't presume that just because you receive benefit, the other person did too, right? Because sometimes we are the ones that something needs to be whittled away from us,
Yeah.
using the wood analogy,
Yeah.
right? And
We're
so,
not ready to be iron ourselves. And then you've brought this up before with that same passage to me saying, and we also have to be careful that if we're iron and someone else is wood, it's a different relationship. Like we can't go
we could harm them.
we could harm them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could whittle them. We could help, but we could also harm. We could also cut a piece of wood in half. That's harming it.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, you're right. It has to be the right relationship because that would be, abusive at that point. And we're seeing a lot of that, the kind of stories of spiritual abuse pop up. in recent years. And so we wouldn't want that. And so it's got to be the right relationship for sure. And I think there was, I mean, I can't speak for you, but I mean, for me, there was trust there that like I knew, okay, I think I didn't know, but I trusted because
Hmm.
trusting isn't the same as knowing until you've experienced it. Then now I can say I know. But early on, I trusted Victor's got my best intentions. Like he's out for my best intentions. And
Hmm.
I trust that he is. So I'm going to go into it with that mindset. And and I think that foundation of trust then allowed for the conversations that followed to this day.
And just so just to be transparent, there were several times where I would take some of the things that we talked about to my dad and just sought his counsel and said, did I say the right thing? Did I offer Drew good counsel when I said this to him? Because and that's just my heart. And I don't ever want to be the reason for hurt in someone else's life,
Mhm,
especially when they're genuinely seeking to grow and be with the Lord and
mhm,
in their relationship with the Lord. And so there were times where I would say that, and then there were times where I would tell my dad, I said, he's coming around. Not that you're coming around to my opinion, but that he's coming around to understanding how these things are so much more nuanced and so much more difficult pastorally and just spiritually. And I said, I I I, I can honestly say there were maybe a dozen times where I said, man, Drew is a true searcher of the truth. And for us, that's an important value, right? Because we want to be true searchers of the truth. And so, I always, regardless of how frustrated I got with you sometimes, because I was like, I don't know why he's thinking that. Um, because again, where we came from and how we were trained
That's
and all
right.
that kind of stuff, I
That's
said,
right.
I don't understand how he's thinking that, but at least you would give me a fair hearing, right? And you would ask the question, and I would ask the question, and we would persist. We would persist, and I think that's something that we need to appreciate more is a willingness to persist in these
Mm,
relationships,
yes.
because when you find somebody, and the thing is, you're not going to have a lot of people who do this in your life.
Yeah.
The- if you have a handful, you are a rich person.
Yeah.
I can say that I probably have 4 or 5 people in my life, but I'm in my 40s. I've cultivated these relationships over a long
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
right? So it's not like they've all just materialized at the same
That's
time.
right.
There were at different points in my life,
That's right.
different points in my journey,
That's right.
and as they've matured, as these relationships have matured, as our friendship has matured, you know, it changes from me pouring into you, to use that language that we like to use in the church a lot, to us mutually, truly, sharing and growing together. And sometimes I'll just, it's gotten to the point where I can trust you with the snarkiness sometimes, right? The things that I want to say that I know can't say to anybody
Oh
else, I can
yeah.
say,
Yeah.
I'm going to just say it to Drew, and says, Drew, I'm never going to say this out loud, but I need to get it out of my system,
Yeah. 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 For sure.
because it'll serve as this poison, right?
That's
It'll just
right.
poison me if I leave it in
That's
there.
right.
And, I shared something with you today. I said, just my sarcastic self. I was just like, ugh,
I gotta get this out. Yeah.
because, we see so many things in the church, well, not in the church necessarily, but from church people,
Yes.
from people who are in the church, and they're doing the best they can. I try to be as gracious as I can
I know.
sometimes, maybe too gracious. They're doing the best they can. They think that it's being helpful. They don't know why it's not being helpful. They
Mm,
don't see it.
mm.
And we need to be careful when we respond to that,
That's
right?
right.
We need to be generous and gracious to them, because if they are not as far along in the journey as we are, right? Just to make a presumption about our own maturity, we need to recognize that at some point God will bring them to a level of understanding, right? That's the hope.
That's right.
That's the desire.
That's right.
That's what we should strive for.
That's right.
And it's not easy. It's not easy. In the same way, I'm a dad. In the same way that the way I treated, my girls when they were babies is not the same way I treat them now
That's
as
right. That's
teenagers,
right.
right? That relationship is changing. That relationship is maturing because they're changing. They're becoming something else. So anyway, like today I got a chance to hold my youngest niece,
Mm,
and just this little baby, she spit up on me. It was great. Not really. um but just to see her and to remember that my little girls were that, well,
yeah.
not, they're not little anymore, but my girls were that size.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, how much time, right, has
Mm,
passed, and
mm,
how much have they changed and become these amazing young women.
mm.
And so that's what it's supposed to look like in the
It
church, right? That
is.
people are
It
growing, and it's
is.
it's never clear cut. It's always kind of awkward at times. It
Yeah.
can be frustrating. It
Yeah.
could be infuriating
Yeah.
if we got honest about it sometimes. So I think that that's the challenge. And so, to see how God has just been able to work in us in this friendship has been so, just reflecting on it today as we're talking has been so refreshing, that I guess that we both had kind of this tenacity that we're like, we're not going to let this go. You know, I saw in you and I continue to see in you someone that whose heart is truly geared towards growing individually, but also trying to address some of the problems that we're seeing in the church right now. And I'm the same way.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 17 years old, the call that I felt from the Lord wasn't a call to be a pastor. It was a call to serve the church. The church being the big C everywhere, right? Not just a local congregation. I work in a local congregation. I minister and I serve that local congregation faithfully. But I also know that there's things that God is asking me to do beyond that.
That's right.
And trying to figure out what that is has been that has been frustrating.
Yeah.
But I continue to do it, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is this. Part of that is
Yeah.
having conversations with pastors, with other ministers, with other Christians, and saying, what can I do? Right? How can I help you to grow?
Yeah.
And that can only happen in friendships,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As we cultivate these relationships and get honest about these things
Yeah.
and be willing to. I remember just a quick anecdote because it just came to mind. I remember when I was still in college, overhearing, right? I wasn't a part of the conversation, but I remember overhearing somebody on the leadership team at the college ministry where I was at saying, if you ever have a question, just ask Victor because he knows everything about the Bible. Okay. I was 18 years old. I didn't know anything, right? I mean, let's just be honest about it. I didn't know anything. I was still trying to figure out what it meant, what my college, what life would look like, who I was going to marry, all this kind of stuff. I was dating the woman I did marry, but you know what I'm saying? I was trying to figure out what that was going to look like. And to have someone say that at then was so jarring, right? That I was already kind of creating that mentality in other people. I was like, and it was by accident. It wasn't intentional, right? And that's all I'm saying. It wasn't something that I was doing intentionally. I genuinely desired to know God more, and I was doing everything I could to do that. And apparently, other people were seeing that, and it was like one of those little times where God just lets you hear something that you shouldn't have heard.
Yeah.
And I was like, it was so humbling, and it still is humbling today.
Yeah.
But that same comment has happened several times in my life. If you want, I always tell people, if you want a straight answer, if you don't want a straight answer, don't ask me, because I'm going to tell you what I think God is saying, to the best of my ability. And I know that has rubbed people the wrong way. I know it has. And so I come with a warning now.
Warning label. Oh man, it's just so good. I mean, it's just it is missing in the church. You mentioned that in talking, that these kind of relationships that are forged and persisted in are many times so missing in the church. In churches, I should clarify that, in churches, in local churches, not enough of these relationships are being forged, are being persisted in, are being formed, are being sought out.
Well, they don't happen by accident.
And I think they're intentional.
That's the part we miss.
And they're missing, but we see it across Jesus's ministry. Like, it's just all over, all he did. Like, that's just who he was. Like, he persisted in relationship with those that were willing to persist back. Right. And there was a mutuality to it, but Jesus didn't give up on people. Like, Jesus didn't, the two brothers are asking to sit at his right and his left. He didn't give up on them. They were where they were at. He didn't give up on Peter just because Peter ended up denying him. He didn't give up on people. He also didn't expect them to be further along than they should be. He just persisted in relationship with them. He learned, I don't want to say he learned, he displayed graciousness. He displayed patience. He displayed tenacity in being in relationship with these men and women that he was in relationship with. And I think I think we've just lost the value of that. I'm not sure we've necessarily lost that. I think we've lost the value of it, meaning we're not placing as high a value on it as we should be. We're placing value in things that are fine, but they're not central. They're peripheral. And we've moved some of the peripheral things to to the life of the church in really in the American church. We've moved some of the peripheral things to the center, and it's like, no, we got to get back to the central things being central again. And these kind of
I have a question,
relationships are central.
because the way you said that made me think of a question. How much of that do you think is a result of people's disappointment with some of the things that have happened in their church experience? Because I think, you know, Jesus was very intentional. And again, we don't point to Jesus because we're trying to be like Jesus. We point to Jesus because he's teaching us how to be with people like us.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's an important distinction that we need to make. We're not trying to mimic Jesus's ability. We're trying to recognize that he could do that with people who are like us, which means that that's the part that we can replicate. You know, the story in I think it's in John 6 where Jesus does the teaching about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, right? The first kind of inkling of what will become the Lord's Supper later. And everyone says, this is a hard teaching. And like almost everybody leaves. And he looks to the disciples. He says, are you going to leave too? Right. And Peter, who was a spokesman, he said, where are we going to go?
Yeah.
Right. You have the words of life. So that they had seen enough, heard enough from Jesus that in spite of how difficult that thing was to receive, to hear, to process, they're like, we may not like it. As a matter of fact, we don't like it. And if we had a choice, we'd probably leave too. But you've given us enough reason to stay.
Well, where else do I go?
Right. Because you have the words of life. And I think we don't lean into that idea enough in the church, because maybe we're not sure how we would have answered that. And that's what I'm saying. I think that this issue of disappointment, right? You know, some of the scandals that we've seen in various parts of the church, and some of the failures that we've seen among some leaders in the church, and even our own kind of fears about whether or not we're living up to whatever the standard is that we've concocted in our own brain, whether it's biblical or not. That disappointment issue can really make it difficult to trust.
Yeah.
Right. I talk about my dad a lot, and so you'll everyone will hear that, just because he has been such a wonderful example in my life. But one of the things that he taught us growing up, he says, we don't count success by the number of people who get saved, or the money in the bank, or the house we live in, or the car we drive. We judge success by the number of friends we leave behind. And he says, when we meet people, one of two things can happen. We're going to be a blessing to them, or they're going to be a blessing to us. But since we don't know what they're going to do, we're going to make sure that we're a blessing to them. And that's a mindset that regardless of what anyone else is going to do, we're going to behave in a certain way. And I have to tell you, that is a very challenging thing. I am still trying to figure out how he does it, because he does it better than anyone I know. And it's amazing, and it's frustrating, because sometimes we as his kids, we're like, you're letting people take advantage of you. And he's like, you can't take advantage of what I freely give. Right. So he has all these answers.
That's right.
And I'm like, this is so infuriating. How did you learn how to do this? You know, and so I'm trying my best to figure out what that looks like. But the thing is that when you have that language, at least, right, when you have those words that you can throw at the thing that you're trying to figure out, it's a little bit easier to say, okay, all right. So that's the mindset that I need to cultivate. That's the approach that I need to have. Okay, where am I falling short on that? Right? How am I missing that? And that's what I'm saying. For me, it kind of manifests itself as a disappointing mode. Like, I'm disappointed that I can't do it like that. And so that's for me, that's the work that I'm doing, right? I'm trying to not be disappointed by just learning how to do it, learning how to live it out more consistently.
Yeah.
And it can be a challenge, and I think we need to accept that. I don't know where it happened, where we started to think in the church that it was going to be easy to be a Christian.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the challenges that we have today, is helping people to realize that being a Christian is not supposed to be a burden or a chore, but it is not something that is going to just be, I say lollipops and unicorns.
Yeah.
It's not going to, and it's not going to some entertainment place. It really is going to cost us something. It's going to be a challenge for us to live it out faithfully and consistently. And so that's what I would say, is that one of my desires is to the best of my ability, is to help people to realize that.
Yeah.
That because there are going to be challenges in living out our faith, we need to do that with other people more intentionally.
Exactly. And the encouragement to persist. And I hope, I think I can say this on behalf of both of us. We hope that this podcast will be a part of that. Will be a part of encouraging people to persist. Will be a conversation we're inviting people into where they can get some encouragement, some challenge, some strength to persist, but also where they can just see how we're doing that with one another and in our own faith life with God, our own relationship with God, that as they see us persisting in relationship with one another and in relationship with God, doing it in normal ways, like normal everyday life ways, not in some extraordinary because we're having mountaintop experiences every day, but because we're just persisting in relationship with God, that they'll be encouraged to do the same. And that's my hope. It's my hope. We see Jesus model it. I like, it's incredible how much Jesus goes and spends time with God, and his disciples see that. It's incredible how Jesus reacts to people and his disciples see that, right? It's incredible how much of the discipleship process happened with Jesus in just everyday relationship with his disciples. And I think that's the biggest focus I think we both have, both in our lives and then for this podcast, is to say, okay, there's a reason why Jesus did discipleship the way he did. There's a reason why he allowed people into his normal everyday life and his relationship with the Father. That's what we need to be modeling ourselves, our own lives, our family life, and our churches after. That's what we need to be modeling them after. Everything else doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. At best, it's extra. All these other things that we've added to what the church is, quote unquote, they're at best extra. Some of them detract from that. And we've added them, but they detract from the ability to live that way with Jesus. And so they need to be removed. We haven't successfully removed some of them, but they need to be removed. Other things are they're just extra. And we've got to...
I think we don't know the difference anymore.
We don't.
I think that's the challenge.
It is the challenge. And
we don't know the difference.
I'm hopeful Jesus can help us navigate that. And we're going to try to, a little bit on this podcast, we're going to talk about some topics where we're trying to do that. We're trying to help navigate and clarify our own navigating of things that are peripheral or extra or on the side of what is actually central to our relationship with Jesus. And we hope that that'll help other people. But that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're striving for. We would love to see, that the main thing become the main thing again, which is such a cheesy pastor saying that I hate that I even just said it, but I'm going to hate myself.
But it's true.
For that. But it's true. But it's true. So anyway, so we love that that if you're listening to this, that you're willingly entering in to this ongoing conversation that we're having, and we welcome you into it. Please reach out to us, send us comments, message us, find us, however, and communicate with us. We'd love to hear some of your own journey with persisting in your own relationship with God and your own relationships with others who are in the faith. We'd love to create a context or a community for some of that to happen. We're going to try to do that in the best ways we can with technology. But we really want this to be a journey with people, not just us talking on a podcast. Yeah. So we encourage you to engage with us and to persist in this podcast with us because we feel like there'll be fruit on the other side of it.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to continue this journey with y'all. Thank you for joining in with this conversation. And we look forward to some of the ones that are coming up. We got some good stuff for you. Send us your questions or your comments, things that you think that are going on in the church or in the culture that you feel like need to be talked about. And if they're not already on our list, we'll make sure to talk about them because, like you said, culture is rapidly changing. It is fast paced right now. And there are all kinds of things we could talk about. So we'd love to hear from y'all. What are some of the things you'd like for us to focus on in these first however many episodes? So send them our way and we'll talk about them.
Thanks, everybody.
Y'all have a good one.
You've been listening to Jesus Took Naps, a remarkably ordinary podcast. Make sure to like our Jesus Took Naps Facebook page and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at JesusTookNaps.live. Also, go to our website, JesusTookNaps.live, to sign up for our email newsletter for updates about the podcast. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.